Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Plenty going on, but let me get to that in a moment. Let me start with some macro thoughts. Tremendous rebound in the emerging markets and commodities. They've now outperformed this year from being deep in the dumps earlier on. You will recall, I'll put up a image that Adnan Chian tweeted, which gives you a general idea of what's happened. Home thoughts. I'm still finishing off these short stories by Raymond Carver, bittersweet, beautiful books of stories. The light was draining out of the room, going back through the window where it had come from. There isn't enough of anything as long as we live, but at intervals a sweetness appears, given a chance prevails. That's very apt as well. Hillary Clinton, thank you, New York. You put your faith in me 16 years ago, and again tonight. I'll never stop fighting for you. So it's Hillary and Donald going head to head. President Obama said the current presidential election is the tip of a broader iceberg of dysfunction that we've seen. And he said that his biggest lesson from his time as president is the big breakthroughs are typically the result of just a lot of grunt work. There's a lot of just blocking and tackling. The voice of Jihad said it was part of Operation Omari, the 2016 spring offensive named after Mullah Omar. Taliban took responsibility for the attack on its official propaganda outlet, the Voice of Jihad, said it was part of Operation Omari, the 2016 spring offensive, named after Mullah Omar, its founder and first emir. The Taliban reported a suicide bomber detonated a vehicle at the gate, which allowed armed fighters to breach the compound. This is a tactic that has been effectively employed by the Taliban and other jihadist groups throughout the world over the past decade. It was a pretty savage attack. Mullah Omar might be dead, but he apparently lives on. I'll put up a photograph of Mullah Omar and another one of a member of the Afghan security forces standing guard at the site of a Taliban-claimed suicide attack in Kabul on Tuesday. The image of Russia as a besieged fortress is almost always part of the Siloviki's rhetoric. This is referring to a lengthy article by Bastrikin, the head of the powerful investigative committee, and saying that this article goes beyond the usual cautious pronouncements. It openly calls for eliminating the last vestiges of democracy and civil rights. Enough playing at fake democracy and following pseudo-liberal values. Democracy or people's power is nothing but power wielded in the people's interest. These interests can be attained through the common good, not through the absolute freedom of certain representatives of society to do as they please. Bastikin's argument is that for the last decade or so, the US and its allies have been fighting a hybrid war against Russia. Sanctions introduced in response to Russia's interference in Ukraine are part of that offensive, as are the recent drop in oil prices and the subsequent devaluation of the ruble. That's what I call oil warfare. Yet, Bastrikin wrote, the Western information war has been even more destructive. It's time to put up a defense against this information war. Bastrikin wrote, tough, adequate, and symmetrical answers needed. As I've said severally, I think President Putin has made giant strides in the military side of things. And I think Syria was an opportunity for him to showcase that. I came across this photograph of Merkel meeting with Erdogan in Istanbul last October. I like this photograph of Obama on his way to well, actually this was from his previous visit when he was leaving. New York Times is writing about this visit. I've read so many accounts over the years predicting the demise of the House of Saud, and each time they've managed to survive. Images of the past have been deeply unsettling for the people of Saudi Arabia, long accustomed to oil-fueled prosperity and regional clout, militants firing in communities along the country's southern border, protesters storming the Saudi embassy in Tehran, civil wars raging in 3 nearby states. The view from Riyadh has become increasingly bleak. Stubbornly low oil prices constrain the government's ability to respond to crises as the kingdom's regional rival Iran moves aggressively to expand its influence at Saudi Arabia's expense. Under huge stress, the Saudis have responded in unpredictable ways, often at odds with Washington's interests. President Obama himself criticized the Saudis as free riders last month, saying for decades the kings and princes who ruled Saudi Arabia wielded their oil wealth and religious clout as the controllers of Islam's holiest sites to pull strings and fund proxies across the Arab world and beyond. Analysts have begun speaking of a Salman doctrine, although it is mostly associated with the king's son, Mohammed bin Salman, 30, who is the defense minister and second in line to the throne, saying Saudi Arabia has shown a growing willingness to use direct force, not very effectively. And then talking about Yemen, talking about Iran, and my sense is that there's a red mist has descended upon the leadership when it comes to Iran. It's tilting the pitch in their responses, which are, in my view, inimical to their medium-term interests. Saudi's other warning makes oil traders sweat after Doha. In an interview published on April 1st, Prince Mohammed said that while Saudi Arabia was ready to cap production in concert with other countries, if there is anyone that decides to raise their production, then we will not reject any opportunity that knocks on our door. Somebody saying I would not even be surprised if they hike production further as a revenge to Iran's reaction. They can withstand lower prices longer than most of the other producers. I'll put up a photograph of Mohammed bin Salman, who's largely seen as the driving force behind Saudi policy. Wall Street closed at 2016 highs. Dow rose 0.27% to 18,053. Moving on to the currency markets, euro dollar 113.57, dollar index 94.09, Japanese yen just below 109, Swissy 0.9617, pound 143.78, Aussie, which has been on a tear, 0.7806, 80.50, key area for the Aussie. India rupee 66.265, South African won 11.3232, the Rial has bounced 3.5302, Egyptian pound 8.88, and the South African rand 14.3541 when I checked earlier this morning. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 1-year chart and just reiterate that the key area is 114.50. And that remains the key. If we push through that, we should see a run up to about 118, 119, even 120. But for now, I expect that level to repel any advance. German Bund yields negative out to 8 years. This is one of the reasons that I think the euro will be capped. Sterling, 143.78. I'll put up a 3-month chart. We're getting close to the top of the range, around 144.50. David Inglis still can't get over this. You'd have to roll over your investment with Japan over 1,000 years to get a 10% return. Moving on to the commodity markets, gold, which was above the pivot level of 1250 earlier this morning, is back below it at 1247. Silver, now at the highest level since June. Have a look at that chart. And crude oil, look at what it's done. It came all the way back to the level that was pertaining before the Doha meeting. Let's see how it behaves here. Moving on to Africa, the UN is concerned by Machar, this is Riek Machar's delay in returning to South Sudan's capital. Apparently, he wanted to bring in a lot of heavy weaponry, which wasn't allowed, and that was the cause of further delay. Congo-Brazzaville bombs dropped in residential areas, including schools, a likely act of retaliation, says Amnesty. 30 bombs were dropped on residential areas, according to eyewitnesses. 3 out of the 4 buildings of local primary school were hit. Bombings appeared to be in retaliation of 4th April fighting. Airstrikes on residential areas in Pool, the southeastern region of Congo-Brazzaville, reportedly resulted in deaths, casualties, destruction of churches, schools, and medical facilities. Represent an unlawful use of lethal force by the country's security forces. Bombings took place on 5th April, appeared to be in direct retaliation to the violence that broke out in Congo's capital, Brazzaville. The Ninjas, an armed group led by Pastor Frederick Ntumi, were blamed by government for the violence, which broke out on the 4th of April and which came weeks after President Sassou Nguesso won the 20th March presidential elections that opposition claims were marred by fraud and ballot irregularities. Eyewitnesses told Amnesty that on the 5th of April, helicopters dropped at least 30 bombs on residential areas in Pool, including 3 out of the 4 buildings of a school in the town of Vinza. The target appeared to be a house which used to be the home of Pastor Frederick Ntumi, leader of the Ninjas. I take you back to something I wrote in November 2014 about Ouagadougou's signal to sub-Saharan Africa. So during the Arab Spring, now in the bleak midwinter, nearly all commentators spoke of how this North African wildfire could not leap the Sahara and head to sub-Saharan Africa. The reasons were that the state, the incumbents, had a monopoly on the tools of violence and would bring overwhelming force and violence to bear. We need to ask ourselves, how many people can an incumbent shoot stone cold dead in such a situation? 100, 1,000, 10,000? This is another point. There is a threshold beyond which the incumbent can't go. Where that threshold lies will be discovered in the throes of the event. Therefore, the preeminent point to note is that protests in Burkina Faso achieved escape velocity. Overthrowing incumbents is all about acceleration, momentum, and speed, best characterized by the German word blitzkrieg. And I was referring to Burkina Faso, but this applies all across the continent. Out of a population of 17 million in Burkina Faso, over 60% are aged between 17 and 24 years. The country's youth flex their muscles. What's clear is that a very young, very informed, very connected African youth demographic can characterize it as a demographic dividend, which for beautiful Blaise turned into a demographic terminator. And I'm saying this is set to alter the existing equilibrium between the rulers and the subjects, and that a rebalancing has begun. Angola was the world's second largest supplier of oil to China, just behind Saudi Arabia. And that's because there are a lot of oil-backed borrowing and they're having to pump more oil in order to keep that in balance. Africa Visual Data tweeted 2015 GDP per capita PPP IMF estimates as of April 2016, and then IMF projection of 2016 GDP Africa top 20, both of which are useful to look at because it shows you how much things have changed. South African all shares up 5.3% and at a 1-month high. It's up 5.3% this year. Dollar Rand, we're at 4-month highs here for the Rand, 14.2854. Let's see if we can hold a lot of optimism. I think a sense that President Zuma is now in big trouble has helped. Egyptian EGX30 up 12.25% this year and is closed at an 8.5-month high. Nigerian all-share down 13.91% year-to-date. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index down 5.59% year-to-date. Agricultural Development Bank raised 450 million cedis, which is $119 million, which is the largest initial public offering in Ghana's history. The IPO was the first in Ghana in about 2 years. Moving to Kenya, the big news, and I'm afraid the news happened after I went to, after I'd written my podcast, but the news coming out of the central bank is that Kenya Commercial Bank has won the race to acquire Chase Bank, and I think that's a net positive. Account holders with 1 million shillings or less will be able to access those accounts. I think the reopening is on the 27th, so a positive step forward. The diaspora is a key component of Kenya Inc., and one senses the government had an epiphany a while back. This is talking about the diaspora being a 2 billion shilling untapped gold mine, single biggest source of foreign exchange in Kenya. I am surprised that we have not launched a Government of Kenya diaspora bond. However, I'm now seeing much more structure and architecture around creating the right investment opportunities for the diaspora. Kenya is among the highest recipients of remittances in Africa. In 2015, Kenya's diaspora sent home a record $1.6 billion in remittances, and I think that's substantially undercounted. KRA, which missed its targets, recorded an increase in revenue of 11.7% in the 9 months to March. And my point is, the target was set very high. This is more than respectable. Interesting piece in Business Daily about how troubled NSE Kenya firms are being hit by a massive share price erosion. Athi River Mining tops the list of big companies whose shares have tanked, shedding 63% in 1 year. National Bank has lost 60% of its value, Uchumi 53%. Kenya Airways down 40%, East African Cables down 53%. Trans-Century down 65%, Atlas Development and Support Services 86%. And this goes back to an article I wrote on the 4th of April, which I titled The Bifurcation at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, and that was largely saying what's being said by this commentator. Shilling at an 8-month high of 101.20, Nairobi all share plus 0.5% so far in 2016. John Gachoro was interviewed. He's of NIC Bank, interviewed by Bloomberg, and he said, "This is the time for arranged marriages. We should start saying you and you must marry. If you don't marry, we'll take away your operating license." Saying capital requirements are too low, particularly with smaller banks that have come under increased pressure from depositors. Gachoro said the collapse of smaller lenders needs to spur more mergers and acquisition, because every time one of them goes down, it shakes the confidence of the public. He also said it should be forced, in my view. It cannot be voluntary, because bank consolidation is a very expensive thing to do. Go back to the article I wrote on the 11th of April. I said the first overarching point to note is that we have now entered a more rules-based system of regulation. What is also clear is that we were previously in a more permissive environment. Tier 3 banks are finding themselves at the bleeding edge of this move to a more rules-based system. Years of resisting increased capital requirements has meant that these Tier 3 banks are pirouetting their businesses on wafer-thin capital. Recent events, Dubai Bank, Imperial Bank, National Bank and Chase Bank, now means investors and depositors are placing considerably less credence on the accounts as presented. Then, in a double whammy, depositors have embarked on a deposit flight to quality, further undercutting them. Without shareholders now stumping up bucket loads of capital, these banks are in effect now zombie banks. The process of consolidation is now market-led. I appreciate the authorities are keen to keep this orderly, not allow it to turn disorderly. The important point for this authority is not to provide a blanket put option and to erect a firewall in the right place. Yes, the central bank governor is a fiendishly difficult brief. Safaricom closed at a 2016 closing high. It's rallied 6.13% in 2016. My price target is 22.50 for this year. Standard Chartered, which has been dropped from the NSE 20 index, I'm not sure why, has surged to 29.23% in 2016. And Kenyan also is up 12.67% so far this year. I like this photograph from the digital humanitarian photo of the day, Kenya's Sevens homecoming after beating Fiji rugby 37 in 2016. Clearly the market was abuzz with talk that Qatar National Bank was in the lead to purchase Chase Bank, and I was quite skeptical of that, subsequently being proven correct. I expect the big cap stocks here in Nairobi to pop higher in a meaningful way as SSA investors recalibrate in favor of Nairobi when Lagos gets ejected from the MSCI Frontier Index because of the lack of convertibility in the Naira. As I said, Safaricom scored a fresh 2016 closing high. My target is 22.50. We're at 17.30. Britam reported full year earnings, took a tough. They reported a loss after tax of £1 billion shillings, big markdown on its listed portfolio, but should claw some of this back. In 2016, of course, it was an eventful year for Britam last year. The flamboyant Mr. Dawood Rawat was ousted from the shareholder register. Britam firmed 1.3% to close at 11.70. And Kenyan was up 3.22% yesterday as well. Thanks for stopping by. If you want to follow the stock market in real time and you want to follow KCB, for example, just register on rich.co.ke, get a password, and then go to Rich Live. If you want to just look at a single stock, go to the expert board. If you want to look at the whole market, go to the normal board. Any problems, get in touch with us over Twitter is normally the quickest way. Once again, thank you.